Joining us now from Dayton, NATO Ambassador Matt Whitaker, and it's great to have you. I wanted you to comment on what we can expect out of Ohio.
Well, good morning, Jackie. It's good to be with you. And before I have a chance to answer your question, I just want to honor the men and women that have given the ultimate sacrifice and service to our country. Their, sacrifice is not forgotten, and I know that we all need to take a moment and think of them this weekend as we celebrate Memorial Day. What we expect here at the NATO Parliamentary Assembly is this is all 32 allies, elected officials, those that are going to decide whether or not the pledge that we make in The Hague as NATO allies to spend a lot more on our defense is followed through. They're the ones that are going to be able to pass the laws to spend the money. And so this has been a very important weekend to meet with them, to understand their unique political concerns. And I think, so far in what we're doing here, I think this lays the groundwork for a really successful Hague summit.
And I'm glad that you bring that up, because we talk about defense spending in the big, beautiful bill, but you also have this NATO piece of it. And a new plan is targeting spend for other countries, because President Trump has always said they need to pay their fair share, of about 3.5% of GDP, plus another 1.5% for some of the newer, non-traditional defense-related spending by 2032. So that's a 5% target. Is that realistic?
Yep. Yeah, I think it is. I think that NATO defense commitment that we're expecting in June at the summit is going to lay the groundwork for a lot of good things. First of all, it's going to allow NATO to deter and defend, and it's going to create the strength in the alliance to bring peace across all the places. But it's also going to not only afford the next generation weapons, but it's also going to be things like M1A1 Abrams tanks. Like when I went up to Lima, Ohio yesterday and went to the tank assembly plant where we're making tanks for Poland. So these are Ohio workers in Ohio jobs, building tanks for our NATO allies. And so these are the types of things that real world application for the United States of America and for strengthening the alliance.
All right, we're going to have more with you, NATO Ambassador Matt Whitaker, so everyone stay with us. We're back with NATO Ambassador Matt Whitaker. Ambassador, I want to ask you about Russia and Ukraine. Will be part of the conversation in Dayton, Ohio, I'm sure, as well. We take a couple of steps forward with the prisoner swap, yet then you take a couple of steps back with the drone strike and missile strike last night. 12 killed, 3 children killed, and dozens were injured. So President Trump wants a ceasefire here. What are the conversations that happen behind the scenes to get us there?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, President Trump wants a ceasefire and he wants peace. He wants the killing to end. There are thousands of people dying every single week on the battlefields of Ukraine, and also civilians that are victims of these strikes. And you're right, the prisoner swap appears that it's going to end up with 1,000 exchanged on both sides, and that means the sides are talking, and it's going to have to be agreement between the Ukrainians and the Russians that are going to have to agree to peace, to a lasting peace. I think is really important because the killing needs to end. But at the same time, words are one thing, but actions speak much louder than words. And so both sides are going to have to demonstrate that they're interested in peace. And I think that's what President Trump has been trying to determine, if both sides, especially the Russians, though, in this moment, are serious about a peace deal. And if not, unfortunately, the war will continue. And there's no military solution to this war, Jackie. I mean, it's going to have to be a diplomatic, negotiated resolution. And so, I think we all need to pray for peace this weekend and just hope that there is a way that this war can end.
I think you're right. And just in the couple of minutes that we have left, I want to get your take on the talks that are happening regarding Iran's nuclear program as well. President Trump wants to end that. He wants to make sure that they are not developing any kind of nuclear weapons. And that would be unprecedented to a certain degree, because they'd have to give certain things up and make sure that they're promising us, that they deliver on what they promise. And so I wonder how you think those talks will continue, and if it's possible to make headway there.
Well, again, it's going to be incremental. It's going to be through diplomatic resolution. But, President Trump's been clear. Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. And whether it's through a negotiated solution or some other solution, the United States of America has been very clear about its position that Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. And at the same time, I think there are other allies, including Israel, that feel the same way. and are going to watch very carefully, whether the Iranians are serious about ending their nuclear weapons program and becoming a first world participant. And so, we're going to, I think, take these steps, obviously trust but verify, and at the same time not do anything and not enter into an agreement that can't be verified and enforced going forward.
Understood. And in the final minute that we have, obviously we are in a negotiation with China over tariffs in this pause period as the president and his team try to make some headway. But I think China coming to the table really showed what the president has been saying over and over again. They need us more than we need them, although we both need each other. Just your final thoughts on that subject.
Yeah, I think you're right, Jackie. I think President Trump has brought China to the table. They do need our market a lot more than we need theirs. But, at the same time, the Iowa farmer, my friends back home that sell their exports to China also would like those markets opened. I mean, it's a competitive world. And what President Trump wants is fair trade. He doesn't suggest that somehow, we're special as the United States of America, but at the same time, he understands that our economy and our innovation is really the envy of the world. And so we should receive the benefits from those advantages that the United States of America has. And unfortunately, whether it's China, whether it's the EU, and so many others, they take advantage of the United States of America. They're not fair with their trade deals, and we need to change that. So, I'm looking forward to President Trump negotiating these to a perfect resolution. And
we do have someone in the White House that is holding them accountable. Matt Whitaker, thank you so much. Appreciate your time today.
Hey, it's Will Kane. Click here to subscribe to the Fox News channel on YouTube. It's the best way to get our latest interviews and highlights. And click to subscribe to the Will Kane podcast for full episodes right now.